For members' statements is concluded. Questions without notice. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and my question is to the Prime Minister. The current Melbourne COVID outbreak has been linked to a man who caught the virus while in hotel quarantine in South Australia. If the Prime Minister had fulfilled his responsibility for creating a safe, national, purpose-built quarantine system, wouldn't Australians be safer today?
The Prime Minister has the call. Members on both sides.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think that is an outrageous slur to put on the South Australian Government, Mr Speaker, for the way that they have acted, as indeed all states and territories have acted, consistent with the National Cabinet decision of March a year ago, Mr Speaker, where together the Commonwealth and the states have worked together to put in place a system of quarantine, administering state public health orders, Mr Speaker, that has had a 99.99% effectiveness rate, Mr Speaker. Now the Leader of the Opposition says it's going well. Well, Mr Speaker, I would ask the Leader of the Opposition to name me one country in the world today, Mr Speaker.
The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. No, the Prime Minister. No, you resume your seat. No, you won't. The Prime Minister can ask the Leader of the Opposition to answer as many questions as he wants, but that is not how question time works. The Prime Minister has to call.
One country that has a quarantine effectiveness rate greater than 99.99%, Mr Speaker. Not one, Mr Speaker. If I had said to this House more than a year ago that, working together with the states and territories, we had put in place such a regime which would have achieved that level of effectiveness, Mr Speaker, then they wouldn't have believed me, and they probably would have opposed it, Mr Speaker, because what we have seen from the Labor Party throughout the pandemic, Mr Speaker, drag-kicking and screaming on every occasion, Mr Speaker.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Prime Minister will resume his seat. Prime Minister resume his seat. The members for Scullin and Fadden will leave under 94A. The Prime Minister has the call.
Speaker, as the government has worked together with the states and territories to fight this virus, all the Labor Party has been interested in doing is fighting us, Mr Speaker, and now they fight amongst themselves, Mr Speaker. So what we will continue to do, more than 1,000 ADF personnel out supporting this arrangement, $500 million supporting the National Resilience Facility put in place in the Northern Territory, as recommended by the Quarantine Systems Review, Mr Speaker, conducted for National Cabinet. And even today, Mr Speaker, as I was speaking to the Acting Premier in Victoria, even today working together now on what I think is a very comprehensive proposal, Mr Speaker, to a proposal that was received from the Victorian Government only weeks ago. But, Mr Speaker, unlike those opposite, I'm not going to attack the states, Mr Speaker. I'm not going to attack the states.
On my right.
I'm going to thank the states, Mr Speaker, for the great job
Members
they're
on
doing.
my right.
I'm going to thank, Mr Speaker, those people who are working in our
The Prime Minister
facilities.
resume his seat. Prime Minister resume his seat. Members will cease interjecting. Members will cease interjecting. The level of interjections is ridiculously high, and you don't need to be terribly experienced to know that this is a very bad time to interject. And as I said yesterday, when every member on one side is interjecting, I'll certainly take action, and I'll take action against those I notice who've behaved poorly in the past or are behaving poorly today. The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, it seems I woke up the sleepwalkers over there, Mr Speaker. That's what it seems, Mr Speaker. We're going to keep working with the states and territories to ensure that not only that the quarantine systems were put in place in partnership, Mr Speaker, but the contact tracing work that is being done, especially by the states and territories, and especially now in Victoria. And I commend the Victorian State Government, Mr Speaker, for the work they're doing, even now, to ensure they're tracking down all of these cases through Mr Speaker,
Prime Minister's
through the
time
systems
has
that particularly
concluded. The member for Longman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government's economic plan is delivering lower taxes and more reliable and affordable energy for Australian businesses and workers to create more jobs and continue driving our recovery from the pandemic? Is the Prime Minister aware of any alternative policies?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Longman for his questions, and very pleased to be with him last week, Mr Speaker, with a very innovative small business
The member for
that is
McNamara
putting
will leave
not only
understanding
Australians in
what a
jobs, but
94A.
helping their employees get into their own homes, Mr Speaker. Lower taxes is making that possible. Lower taxes, whether it's lower taxes for the employees, Mr Speaker, are working these businesses, or particular investment incentives that are ensuring that businesses can put the investment in through the instant expensing write-offs that are in place, the research and development tax concessions, the new patent box arrangement, Mr Speaker, which will significantly lower the investment in new medical technologies that not only save lives but employ a lot of Australians and achieve significant earnings for this country. It's creating jobs, Mr Speaker. It's creating investment. It's all part of Australia's recovery plan that was set out by the Treasurer in the budget, Mr Speaker. But there's another important component of that, and that's ensuring that we're reducing electricity prices, putting downward pressure on electricity prices, and, Mr Speaker, ensuring that businesses in this country, and particularly in regional areas, in the heavy industries, Mr Speaker, of this country, can get access to the affordable and reliable energy they need to keep people in jobs. And we're doing that at the same time as seeing emissions reduced by 19% since 2005. Like economies like Canada, since that time, Mr Speaker, 0% reduction in emissions. Here in Australia, we have achieved 19% reduction in emissions since 2005. But we want to keep making things in this country as we are, Mr Speaker. We want to keep producing aluminium, whether it's up in Gladstone or down in Portland or up in Tomago, Mr Speaker. We want to keep making steel, whether it's in Whyalla, Mr Speaker, or other places. Mr Speaker, we're doing that by ensuring they get the affordable and reliable energy they need, not just now but in the future. That's why $76.9 million was put into the Reliability and Emergency Reserve Trader Scheme in Portland to keep the Portland aluminium smelter open. It's why we've invested through Snowy Hydro into the Kurri Kurri gas plant, Mr Speaker, opposed by those opposite. We get a yay from the member for Hunter, we get a nay from the member for McMahon, and we get a maybe, Mr Speaker, for the member from Geelong, Mr Speaker. From the member for Corio. They are all over the place on this, and when it comes to the Leader of the Opposition, who knows what he thinks? Who knows what he thinks, Mr Speaker? Kurri Kurri plant, Mr Speaker, is supporting jobs in the Hunter. It's supported by those on this side, Mr Speaker. It's opposed by the sleepwalkers on that side in the Labor Party, Mr Speaker. And the Arena CFC initiative, which is going to see more invested in carbon capture and sequestration, on soil carbon, Mr Speaker, on lower emissions technologies, on hydrogen, opposed by the members opposite, by the sleepwalkers opposite, who have their eyes closed to the needs of regional heavy industry businesses, Mr Speaker.
Has concluded. The member for Lawler.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, how many of the Victorians infected in the latest COVID-19 outbreak were vaccinated?
The Minister for Health.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I'm happy to seek that information from the Victorian government. What I can
Members
say,
on my left.
well, we actually don't have access to the personal details of individuals under the confidentiality.
Members on my right.
That's part of the law. It's a legal matter. But having said that, Mr Speaker, I am happy to say that Australia has just had a record vaccination day, which I am sure will be welcomed by those on the opposition benches. 104,000 Australians, almost 3.8 million Australians all up. So 104,000 Australians have now been vaccinated. And that is good news for Australia, because what that shows is that as we have expanded access to vaccination,
The Minister for Health
50,
will pause for a second. I'm issuing a general warning. If members want to continue interjecting, I'll eject them. There's no point in me repeating myself over and over again. I'm going to be unusually succinct If anyone doesn't understand what I'm saying, feel free to approach the chair. Members on both sides. The Minister for Health.
Everybody over the age of 50 has access to vaccination in Australia, and we are seeing those numbers increase both in our general
The member for
practices—
Jellybram will leave under Standing Order 94A. The Minister has the call.
both in our general practices, where between the general practice and the aged care vaccinations we've seen over 60,000 vaccinations in the last 24 hours, and through the state system where we have seen approximately 40,000 vaccinations. Those two systems are working together, and what that means is that more Australians are being vaccinated every day. 3 weeks ago was a record week. 2 weeks ago was another record. Last week was a record. This week we've already seen a record daily
Member for Brand
number
will leave
of
under Standing
vaccinations
Order
of
94A. No, I'm just making very clear to the House, members might be happy to behave in an unparliamentary way every single question time. I'm not prepared for that to continue. I'm making it very clear. The Minister has the call.
Thank you. A record daily number of 104,000 vaccinations, but very significantly, that includes two other critical figures. In our aged care population, 95% of facilities have already been vaccinated, and that includes 15 out of 15 in the local government area of Whittlesea, which have all had second doses. And it also includes the fact that, as of today, 50% of over 70s around Australia have been vaccinated. That is a fundamental and important protection, because as we expand out our ability to be vaccinated, we start with the most vulnerable. We then work our way through, and what we see is that those in aged care have a 95% vaccination
The Minister's time has concluded.
and we have—
Minister's time has concluded. I call the member for Mallee.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. Will the Deputy Prime Minister inform the House how the Morrison-McCormack government's economic recovery plan is creating jobs and driving growth in regional Australia?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The member for Mallee represents an electorate in regional Victoria in which the local roads and community infrastructure program is having such a benefit. Indeed, the dozen councils in her electorate, just like the councils throughout each and every member's electorate, are receiving valuable funds under that LRCI program. In the member for Mallee's electorate, it's $73.5 million. That is substantial. That is getting jobs on the ground, workers on site, construction happening and making such a difference. Now, I visited Mallee last week, and one of the projects that I saw was in the small town of Warwick-Nabil, population 2,400. The local community, through Woodbine, a disability residential facility, has contributed $1.3 million to build a new disability accommodation centre. Through the Building Better Regions Fund, we contributed a further $1.2 million to build a new facility and refurbish the old one. Now, the new facility will provide a fit-for-purpose accommodation unit for 5 people with acute disabilities. The project will support half a dozen jobs through construction and create a further 3.5 FTE jobs ongoing. They're not big numbers, but they mean such a difference to a small town, such a difference to the local community. And I also visited Mildura, where the Mildura South Sporting Precinct has to be seen to be believed. It is one of the best sporting precincts, albeit not finished yet, but well on the way, in regional. And well, you may laugh, but it's only a couple of months away. Only a couple of months away. It will be opened, and I look forward to going down there for the opening. And when you look at that facility, last time I visited the site, it was just a dusty old paddock, but under the Liberals and Nationals, well, we've converted that, with the help of the local community, the help of the local council, into a magnificent sporting precinct, and comprising 2 full-size football ovals, 500 luxe light towers to AFL standard, a 2-storey stadium with 6 indoor netball and basketball courts and more to come. And you know, when we invest in regional programs, we put it into the regions. Unlike Labor, when they were, it was Watson. It was Watson that got funding under a regional program. It's meant for country areas. It's not meant for the member for Lawless electorate, the former member for Lawless electorate. It's meant for the regions. That's why we support these important regional programs. Daniel McLeod, a director of local firm Building Solutions, he said that the project had been an amazing opportunity for builders in his electorate, in his firm, to use their skills to employ more apprentices.
Deputy Prime Minister's time has concluded. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How many more outbreaks do there have to be until the Prime Minister understands that he needs to do his job and deliver a safe, national, purpose-built quarantine system and fix his bungled vaccine rollout?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, there you see it, Mr Speaker, the bipartisan display in the fight against the virus, Mr Speaker. That's what we've seen from the Labor Party all the way
Members
through
on
this,
both
Mr
sides.
Speaker. On every opportunity when they're tested, Mr Speaker, they'd rather fight the Liberal Party, fighting those Tories, Mr Speaker, which is the reason why the Leader of the Labor Party came here. Didn't come here to work together to get solutions. He just came here to fight and fight the Tories, Mr Speaker. Fighting the Tories isn't going to fight the virus, Mr Speaker. That's what this government's doing. That's what this government's doing. And under this government, Mr Speaker, working with the states and territories, 30,000 deaths have been avoided in this country. 30,000 deaths avoided in this country when you compare it to the average of OECD countries around the world. And, Mr Speaker, there are more people in jobs today than there were before the pandemic. Now, the Leader of the Labor Party, Mr Speaker, may want to play politics with the pandemic.
The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Treasurer will cease interjecting. I remind the House again that I've issued a general warning. The Prime Minister has been answering the question for exactly a minute. It was a very specific question. He's entitled to a short preamble. Can I say he's had a long preamble, and he needs to bring himself to the specifics of the question.
So, Mr Speaker, $500 million invested in the National Resilience Facility for quarantine in the Northern Territory. That was the recommendation of the Holton Review that went to National Cabinet, commissioned by National Cabinet, to supplement the support that is being provided and the exercise of public health orders at a state level as agreed by the National Cabinet to fight this pandemic. We're working to the plan that the states, territories and the Commonwealth agreed as part of the National Cabinet. The Leader of the Labor Party opposed the National Cabinet, then he said he wanted to be on it, Mr Speaker, and then he opposed it again and said it was useless. Mr Speaker, this is a Leader of the Labor Party who hasn't sought to help the government fight the virus.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
On point of order on direct relevance, what the Prime Minister is saying now is neither relevant nor is it true.
I just say to the Prime Minister he needs to be relevant to the question. He's had a preamble and he doesn't get a closing statement. He's had the preamble. I'm making myself very clear.
Direct reference to the quarantine system put in place by the government with the states and territories.
Okay, well, I'm going to say to the Prime Minister he can pause. He had done that and he'd moved on. And I'm asking you to return to the question.
Happy to do that, Mr Speaker. So
I don't care whether you're happy or not. Okay. You need to return to the question.
$500 million, Mr Speaker, invested in the National Resilience Facility, putting in place support to go with a further system around the country done with the states and territories that has delivered a 99.99% effectiveness rate for quarantine in this country. That is just a simple fact. That is the system that this country has put in place. Mr Speaker, they are the facts of the effectiveness of the system run by our states and territories together with the Commonwealth. Those opposite may want to talk it down. Those opposite, Mr Speaker, may want to undermine public confidence, whether it's in the vaccine program or in the quarantine
Prime Minister
system.
will pause. The member for Isaacs will leave under Standing Order 94A.
Right from the outset.
The member for Mayo has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. Bryony has incomplete quadriplegia following an accident 2 years ago that broke her neck. Bryony receives limited funding to help with showering and toileting, no funded rehabilitation or funded regular care or respite. If Bryony was 64 when she broke her neck, she would have an NDIS package of support tailored to her needs. But Bryony was 66. Minister, how is this not age discrimination? And when will the government agree to recommendation 72 of the Aged Care Royal Commission report calling for equity for older Australians with a disability?
The Minister for Health has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Mayo, and I understand the circumstances of Bryony and her family, and firstly to thank and acknowledge her support and her care and the difficulties that they face. Part of our response to the Royal Commission has been to invest very specifically in the needs of those with greater distress. What we have done through a combination of investment, without knowing her particular circumstances, and I'd be happy to work after this question on that, whether it's within home care or whether it's within residential. Within home care, there's been a $7.2 billion investment, and that home care includes 80,000 packages, but also an uplift in the amount of funds that are available specifically for respite. That may well be able to assist in her particular circumstances, again without knowing the particular conditions. Secondly, in residential care. Now, residential care, of course, drove much of the reasoning behind the Prime Minister calling the first ever Royal Commission for Aged Care in Australia. In residential care, we have $7.8 billion approximately of investment, and that investment includes $7.2 billion, which goes directly to an uplift in the $10 a day basic daily fee, and that's then followed by increased support services as we adopt the new funding mechanism going forward. What does that mean, though, for Bryony? That means that there are more funds for better care. Specifically, what we're able to do as part of that is to make sure that there's greater in-reach by doctors. There's over $300 million to provide a doubling of the aged care access incentive, which will bring more doctors into more aged care homes, and that will provide particularly better and deeper coverage for those with complex needs. And it also is accompanied by the fact that we have bonuses for nurses of $2,700 and $3,700 a year to make sure that we have higher retention and higher entry into the system of qualified nurses. And together, that combination of funding, whether it's in home care or whether it's in residential care, will operate to take care of not just everybody, but in particular those with higher complexity needs. One of the challenges which has driven the Royal Commission and has driven the response to the Royal Commission has been the need to focus on those with higher complexities such as Bryony. Thank you.
The member for Reid.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer remind the House how Australian families and businesses, like those in my electorate of Reid, are benefiting from the Morrison government's proven record of delivering tax cuts and generating new jobs? And is the Minister aware of any alternative?
The Treasurer has
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Reid for a question. Acknowledge her experience as a psychologist before coming to this place, her strong advocacy on behalf of mental health issues, Mr Speaker, and I had the opportunity to join the member for Reid in her electorate recently to visit a small business, a family-owned business, Scabello Coffee, that is using our immediate expensing provisions to expand its production line, buy a new roaster and employ new people. Exactly what this budget is designed to do, Mr Speaker, a budget that is designed to create more jobs and to lower taxes. The extension of the low and the middle income tax offset to support another 10 million taxpayers with tax relief. The extension of the immediate expensing provisions and the loss carry-back provisions for another year, Mr Speaker, as well as the commercialisation of research and development with a patent box for the medical and biotech industries. Now, Mr Speaker, I'm asked, are there any alternative policies, Mr Speaker? And we know that the Labor Party is hopelessly divided and confused I take the interjection from the 12th man of politics, the member for Rankin, Mr Speaker, always carrying the drinks, never trusted with the new ball, can't ever get a question up during budget week, Mr Speaker. Now, the reality is the Labor Party is hopelessly divided when it comes to tax policy. You got the member for Corio out there effectively supporting stage 3, saying he doesn't want to get in the way of anyone in their tax cut. Then you got the member for Rankin out there talking down the tax cuts because we know—
The Treasurer will resume his seats. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. It goes to relevance, and I refer to your previous ruling where you encouraged people on this side of the House to stay within standing orders, and you're quite right that they should. But when government ministers can't go 1 minute on their issues without just then spending over 2.5 minutes sledging the opposition, then you will get unruly behaviour, Mr Speaker. You will get that. This is question time, not sledge time.
Members on my right and left. The Treasurer has asked about alternative policies. That does open the question up, and I agree that the manner in which these questions are answered can prompt unruly behaviour, no matter how unparliamentary that is. What I do ask of ministers is they actually have to, if they're asked about alternative policies, refer to them, not give a political speech or a character assessment on the individuals. It's policies they've been asked about, so you'll need to stick to the policies.
Because the policy that we're interested in is the legislated stage 3 of our tax plan, which will help support more than 12 million taxpayers. Now, the member for Corio seems to be speaking in favour of our stage 3 tax cuts. The member for Rankin, always in favour of higher taxes, and indeed the co-architect of $387 billion of higher taxes, is talking it down. But the Leader of the Opposition, in his dressing gown, in his slippers, sleepwalking towards the cliff, Mr Speaker, sleepwalking towards the cliff, aided and abetted by the member for Maribyrnong, he doesn't know what he really thinks. He does not know what he really thinks, Mr Speaker.
Just saying to the Treasurer, no, I'm just saying to the Treasurer, as I've made very clear, there's a number of points I'm trying to make as clearly as I can. One is I'm not going to keep tolerating the level of interjections. I think I've made that clear today. The other thing I'm not going to tolerate is rulings being acknowledged and then, frankly, ignored. So I've asked the Treasurer to stick to alternative policies. If he wants to give a general character assessment of those opposite, he'll need to find another time to do it throughout the parliamentary day, no matter how much he's scripted it beforehand. The Treasurer has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker.
Members on my left.
Well, Mr Speaker, the reality is we have legislated tax cuts for more than 12 million Australians. The Leader of the Opposition does not know if he's in support of our stage 3 of the legislated tax policies that are designed to create more jobs, policies that are designed to lower taxes, policies that are designed to encourage aspiration, policies that are designed to reward effort, because we on this side of the House stand for lower taxes, we on this side of the House stand for more jobs, those on the other side of the House stand for higher taxes.
The Treasurer's time has concluded.
Jobs.
The Deputy Manager of Opposition Business.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, and I refer to his previous answer in relation to quarantine. Back in March, the Prime Minister announced that the capacity of the only national quarantine facility in Australia, at Howard Springs in the NT, would increase from 850 to 2,000 places by April-May. Well, it's now the 26th of May. Why hasn't the Prime Minister delivered on that announcement, putting Australians at risk?
The Minister for Health.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I'm delighted to address quarantine in Australia because, as many would be aware, in the last day there were over 500,000 cases worldwide of COVID-19. There were over 11,000 lives lost to COVID-19. And what we know in Australia is that our single most significant protection, our first ring of containment against this global influx and this global pandemic is our border protection and our quarantine system. The element that the Commonwealth has put in place as part of that is the National Resilience Centre. The transfer of responsibility is underway between the Commonwealth and the Northern Territory. I should note that the Northern Territory has actually requested that it take responsibility for the facility at Howard Springs, the opposite policy to that which is being proposed by the opposition, but that's okay. We're working directly with Chief Minister Gunner on that front. At this point, what we're seeing is that that capacity is being expanded. We have already brought home 2 flights recently from India, and we have seen a far lower rate of positivity. We had a 13% rate of positivity amongst arrivals from India. We then paused those flights. We put in place rapid antigen testing, PCR testing, which was overseen by Qantas, and what we have seen is that the result of that is that we have 2 changes in capacity, not just the number of beds that have increased, but the capacity of the system to deal with positive cases, because the second great limit is high levels of cases. And we saw significant opposition and criticism to our actions to prevent the influx of cases from India from those on the other side. What we have seen is the Leader of the Opposition playing with the idea of importing positive cases to Australia.
The Minister for Health will resume his seat. Minister for Health will resume his seat. I've now asked the Minister for Health to resume his seat for the 3rd time. The Minister for Health can resume his seat, full stop. I'm not going to be ignored. We'll go to the next question. I asked him 3 times to resume his seat. The member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and my question is to the Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction. Can the minister inform the House how the Morrison government is investing in technology to create jobs, support Australian industry and manufacturing and drive down our emissions? And is the minister aware of any alternative policies?
The Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Robertson for her question. As someone who previously worked in the telecommunications sector, she knows how important new technology is to creating jobs, Mr Speaker, to creating jobs. And that includes in her electorate on the Central Coast and includes businesses like Star Scientific that we recently saw, world-beating technology from Australia using hydrogen in a world-beating way to produce heat and electricity, Mr Speaker, right there on the Central Coast. Now, our technology investment roadmap is all about driving $80 billion of combined public and private sector investment in clean technologies and low emissions technologies, Mr Speaker, 160,000 jobs over the coming decade, Mr Speaker, and ARENA is central to that plan. Central to that plan. Now, Mr Speaker, we've given ARENA an additional $1.4 billion of baseline
The members for Sydney
funding.
and McMahon. The minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We've given ARENA another $1.4 billion of baseline funding. But
The member
on top
for
of that,
Corangamite can leave under Standing Order 94A. I mean, I can't make it any more clear.
on top of that, we've committed $192 million to additional programs, Mr Speaker, including investment in electric vehicle charging, Mr Speaker, hydrogen refuelling, microgrids for regional Australia, $20 million for new technologies for heavy vehicles, $47 million for energy efficiency in heavy industries, Mr Speaker, 1,400 jobs from those programs, Mr Speaker. And that new funding hasn't just been supported by ARENA, which it has been supported by, but 20 different organisations, including the Business Council of Australia, the AI Group, the National Farmers Federation, Climate Works, the Investor Group on climate change. But sadly, Mr Speaker, it hasn't been supported by the Labor Party. Not by the Labor Party, Mr Speaker, because yesterday the member for McMahon sought to outgreen the Greens, Mr Speaker, by opposing 1,400 jobs, Mr Speaker, but these are jobs for clean technologies. Now, Mr Speaker, just last week he opposed 1,800 new jobs in the Hunter Valley, Mr Speaker, and he has committed Labor to opposing investment in electric vehicle charging, regional renewable energy, Mr Speaker, and energy efficiency. And Mr Speaker, in a few short months, the member for McMahon has been able to achieve what it took 7 long years and 3 election losses for the member for Hindmarsh to achieve, and that is a deeply divided Labor Party, Mr Speaker, that is turning its back on the workers of Australia, Mr Speaker, turning its back on the workers of Australia.
The minister's time has concluded. The Deputy Manager of Opposition Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister again. According to the front page of today's Herald Sun, the Prime Minister's COVID vaccine rollout is so slow that Australia is ranked 113th in the world. The Prime Minister promised Australians last year we would be at the front of the queue. Prime Minister, isn't it true that we're so far back we can't even see the front of the queue?
The Prime Minister has the call.
I don't know what world those sleepwalkers opposite are living in, Mr Speaker. I don't know what world they're living in, but I know every Australian is very happy to be living in Australia during the course of this pandemic, Mr Speaker. I don't know Australians who want to go and take up residence and live in the COVID environment, whether it be in Europe, the United States, UK or anywhere else, Mr Speaker. I know that Australians, because they approach me every time when I go out into regional Australia or the suburbs and cities of this country, Mr Speaker, they know here in this country they're living a life in this country during COVID like few are anywhere else in the world, Mr Speaker. They know the reality that the government of this country has worked together with other governments at a state and territory level, Mr Speaker, to ensure that this country has enjoyed a safety from this pandemic and an economic recovery like few, if any, other countries in the world. And those opposite, Mr Speaker, those opposite may want to retreat into whinging and complaining and undermining the government as we fight the virus and they focus on the politics. But I think Australians will form the same view that the member for Patterson has, that we sound, they said, Labor, like a whinging people.
The Prime Minister will resume his
like
seat. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order. Prime Minister's indicating he's concluded his answer. I will make the point I was about to make anyway, and that is that when it comes to relevance, which I presume is the standing order the Leader of the Opposition was rising on, when a question has a number of elements, including a really flippant element at the end of the question that arguably is outside, well, certainly could be argued on a strict sense to be outside the standing orders, my option is to rule the question out of order or allow a lot of tolerance in the answer. And that's why I did on that occasion. So for those framing the questions, you just need to bear that in mind. The member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Environment. Will the Minister update the House on how the Morrison government is boosting the circular economy and the thousands of Australian jobs that go with it as part of our economic recovery plan? Is the Minister aware of any alternative policies?
The Minister for the Environment.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for Lindsay for her question? The Morrison government's recycling agenda is about protecting the environment and creating jobs. Australians want to be confident in their recycling, that everything is collected and recycled into something new with value, not wasted in landfill or shipped overseas. And that's why this government is leading a $1 billion transformation of the waste and recycling industry through legislation, investment and its purchasing power. This transformation will protect our environment, divert more than 10 million tonnes of resources from landfill and create more than 10,000 new Australian jobs. Last year we established the Recycling Modernisation Fund, a three-way partnership between the Commonwealth, states and territories and industries to make sure we've got the recycling capacity for the future. And the way industry has stepped up has been incredible. Last month I was pleased to officially open Bingo Industries' $100 million state-of-the-art materials
The member for
processing
McMahon can
centre
leave under Standing Order 94A.
in Western Sydney.
Member for McMahon
this
is about to be named unless he leaves immediately.
It will be
For
the
those,
largest.
hang on, no, for those expressing surprise, you must have short memories, and by that I mean less than 10 minutes from when I mentioned the member for McMahon. The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The largest recycling facility of its type in the world. And as Bingo said, They've been encouraged to invest in master recycling assets because of government policy that supports the development of a sustainable domestic recycling industry. The construction of this project has created 400 jobs and will generate 200 once operational, and it will achieve a 90% recovery rate from landfill, which is incredible. Last week I was in the electorate of the member for Mallee, and we visited Integrated Recycling, a company that takes plastic like vine covers and poly pipe and turns it into railway sleepers that have been approved for use by Metro Trains and V-Line. Not only are these sleepers more sustainable than concrete or timber, but they actually outlast them. The Minister for Defence Industry has delivered Defence's first recycled road at RAF Base William Point Cook in 2020. The project consumed 600 kilos of waste plastics and 210 tonnes of concrete waste rubble as sub-base material. It demonstrates our determination to support our recycling agenda through government procurement. Mr Speaker, construction, demolition, commercial, industrial waste are the next phase of a very busy waste agenda for this government, but they are all about protecting the environment, creating jobs and growing the economy.
The member for Ballarat.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm when he tabled his Chief of Staff's excuse for a report yesterday, no one had told Ms Higgins it was coming?
The member for Ballarat, I will give her an opportunity to rephrase the question.
Can the Prime Minister confirm when he tabled his Chief of Staff's report yesterday that no one had told Ms Higgins it was coming, no one had told Ms Higgins what it said, no one had told Ms Higgins it would be tabled, and no one had told Ms Higgins it would repeat the smear that led to the report in the first place? Doesn't Ms Higgins deserve better than this, Prime Minister?
The member's time has concluded. The Prime Minister can answer the questions that were asked within the 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. These were serious allegations. They were taken seriously. There was a proper investigation undertaken by my Chief of Staff. Mr Speaker, those opposite yesterday were seeking to criticise the government for not being transparent about the release of the report. We released the report, Mr Speaker. Whether we release the report, they are critical. If we don't release the report, they're critical, Mr Speaker. So we released the report in the interest of full transparency. I have not made any comment on the contents of the report or repeated any of the matters in that report. It is there tabled for the benefit of all members to be able to read and have available to them, Mr Speaker. At the time of tabling the report, my Chief of Staff also contacted Ms Higgins and ensured that she had a copy of that as we reached out, Mr Speaker, to ensure that she received the report at the same time it was being tabled.
The member for Herbert.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence Industry. Will the minister inform the House on how the Morrison government's record investment in Australia's defence industry is creating jobs and strengthening Australian manufacturing, including in my home state of Queensland, and is the minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Minister for Defence Industry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Herbert for his question and his outstanding support for local defence industries in Queensland, and also acknowledge his service to his nation. Mr Speaker, can I say to the men and women of the ADF that this government has your back. In Queensland, we're building 211 next-generation vehicles at Rymatel's new facility for our Army. This is a truly national program, creating 1,450 jobs right across the nation. In Western Sydney, Thomas Global Systems is delivering the trainer system for these Boxer vehicles. Melbourne-based CableX will deliver the cabling for these vehicles, and Tectonica will deliver the night fighting capabilities for the Boxer vehicles. Mr Speaker, still in Queensland, in the good member for Ford's electorate, another defence industry champion, Holmwood Highgate, quite a tongue twister, has secured an additional $30 million defence contract to deliver water and fuel containers for our Army vehicles, supporting 150 jobs, 150 important jobs for this proud family-owned business. And, Mr Speaker, all of this is possible because of our government's $270 billion investment in our defence capability. Not only are we delivering thousands of jobs and opportunities for defence industry right across the country, we're also building at home what we need in order to defend our nation. Unlike those opposite, Mr Speaker, who shamefully gutted $18 billion from their defence budget, cutting capability, cutting jobs and very, very shamefully risking the defence of our nation at the same time. But our plan, Mr Speaker, I think that's pretty clear. We're building ships in Adelaide and Henderson. We're building armoured vehicles in Queensland, and we're delivering world-class facilities and infrastructure. Mr Speaker, this government's record speaks for itself. We're getting on with the job of delivering for our men and women in uniform. But shamefully, we know that this isn't a priority for those opposite. When the Leader of the Opposition failed to mention the defence of our nation in his budget reply speech, and just ask the member for Paterson, we know what she says. She says her party's sleepwalking off a cliff, so you don't need our opinion.
No,
Mr. Speaker,
the minister will pause. Members on both sides, the minister was asked about alternative policies. She wasn't asked about criticisms of what those have said opposite, because that is outside the standing orders. So you need to stick to policies that have been put forward by someone else, i.e. an alternative, and if that happens to be the opposition, which it almost always is, you'll need to say what those alternatives are.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think the Australian public and the men and women in uniform know what we stand for, and we stand on our record, unlike those opposite, too busy fighting amongst themselves.
The member for Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Why did the report prepared by the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff blame journalists for smearing Brittany Higgins' loved ones? Does he seriously expect this House to believe journalists, not his own office, were at fault? Why won't the Prime Minister ever accept responsibility?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, the report from my Chief of Staff was tabled yesterday, and I don't accept the caricature of the way that was represented by the member in asking that question.
The member for Chisholm.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry, Science and Technology. Will the Minister update the House on how the Morrison government's research and development tax incentives are helping Australian businesses to innovate and create jobs as part of Australia's economic recovery plan? Is the Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Minister for Industry, Science and Technology.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Chisholm for her question. And I know that she, like the government, is backing business, and she knows that the government is committed to policies that help fantastic Australian businesses to grow the economy and create jobs as we come out of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the member asked about the government's research and development tax incentive. That provides around $2 billion per year, that's per year, in support of research and development, and it applies to a range of businesses across manufacturing, agriculture, healthcare and a variety of scientific fields. And one of those businesses is in the member for Chisholm's electorate. It's a great business called RayGen, and they are using the R&D tax incentive to change the way that solar energy is captured and stored. And Richard Payne, the Chief Executive Officer of that great company, said this about the government's tax incentive policy. The R&D tax incentive enables us to be able to employ very highly skilled individuals to develop our core technology, which needs extensive R&D to prove itself out in a commercial environment. So just a great example of how that policy is having a practical, on-the-ground effect. Backing business, innovating, creating new jobs, and of course part of this is about unlocking the private sector investment that creates the path for a business to deliver onto the world stage. And we are now also investing a further $2 billion over the forward estimates in the R&D tax incentive. That will see the cap removed on refunds, it lifts the rate, and it further rewards businesses that invest the most in R&D. And further, and very importantly, the R&D tax incentive is supported and complemented by a range of other policies. The $1.5 billion modern manufacturing strategy in high-value areas of manufacturing, where Australia has a clear competitive strength or emerging priorities. Tax incentives for early-stage investment, and that's seen about $630 million invested in innovative companies. The patent box that was announced in this year's budget, lower taxes for income derived from medical and biotech patents, the $600 million Entrepreneurs Program, that's helped 20,000 businesses innovate and commercialise. And of those individual businesses, on average, each business has created 4 new jobs and generated over $1.5 million extra revenue for that business. So when you look at that, that is a very comprehensive suite of policies that is driving innovation, research, development and growing business. And I'm asked about alternatives. Are there any alternative policies? Well, there are certainly not any new alternative policies. There are a few old alternative policies. There is, of course, Startup Year, which is a 6-year-old alternative policy from the member for Maribyrnong that was re-announced. And the other policies are basically $387 billion worth of taxes on the economy from the last election, which were rejected but never dumped. So you've got the government with new, innovative policies for innovation and nothing beyond.
The member for Whitlam.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. The Treasurer has introduced a law which allows government to take control of Australian superannuation investments and cancel those investments that it does not like. Resources, energy, infrastructure and agricultural investments are at risk. When will the government admit that it's got this wrong and abandon its plan to treat workers' superannuation money as if they were Liberal Party funds?
The Treasurer has the call.
When will those opposite understand that superannuation belongs to the people who put it there, Mr Speaker?
Members on both sides.
The people who put it there. It doesn't belong to the fund managers, it doesn't belong to the unions, and it doesn't belong to the honourable member. Now, the reality is this legislation before the parliament will help put an extra $17 billion in the pockets of people who have superannuation, Mr Speaker. That's because it's going to provide more choice. That's because it's going to provide more competition. That's because it's going to allow Australians to go online and see the performance of their super fund, both in terms of fees charged and the performance of the fund. And we're getting rid of duplicate, unnecessary, unwanted accounts, as was recommended by the Productivity Commission. Now, it might surprise those opposite to know that Australians spend more than $30 billion a year.
The Treasurer will resume his seat. So the Treasurer, people are entitled to take points of order. I mean, it is actually a right under the standing orders. I mean, it's they're entitled to take a point of order. The member for Whitlam on a point of order.
On relevance, Speaker, I asked the Treasurer about the power he wants to give himself to cancel workers' superannuation investments.
The member for Whitlam will resume his. And if the member for Whitlam's complaining about the content of the Treasurer's answer, he might look to the last part of his question and open it up to wide political debate. So if you can't help yourself on that front, I sort of can't help you as much in reining in the Treasurer. The Treasurer has the call.
The honourable member needs to understand that this legislation helps protect the interests of Australians with superannuation by giving them more choice, by giving them more competition.
The Treasurer will pause. The member for Goldstein will leave under Standing Order 94A. And members on my left might join him. He can have an alternative debate outside the chamber. The Treasurer has the call.
It's no coincidence that the member for Whitlam sought an interjection when I was explaining to the House that Australians spend more than $30 billion on super fees, Mr Speaker, more than their household electricity and gas bills. And we are seeking to reduce those fees for Australians, Mr Speaker. This bill will remove the need for duplicate accounts. It will establish a best financial interest duty, Mr Speaker. It will give more choice so Australians can get to compare the performance of their funds, both in terms of fees charged as well as the return of those funds. And it builds on other important superannuation reforms that we have passed through this parliament, like allowing under 25s to opt in to insurance in the super, like banning exit fees, like reducing the fees on low balance accounts, like consolidating inactive accounts, Mr Speaker. Like these are important reforms that are designed to support Australians with super. And while those opposite will always do the bidding of the unions, Always do the bidding of the industry funds. We on this side of the House are enabling Australians to choose and enabling Australians to get a better deal from their fund. And I remind the House there was this side of politics that supported allowing Australians to access their own money during the COVID crisis, up to $20,000, which was another important initiative which enabled Australians to access their own money. Because at the end of the day, when people put money into superannuation, it remains their money, not the money of the unions, not the money of the industry funds, and not the money of the fund managers.
The member for Flynn.
My question is to the Minister of Resources, Water and Northern Australia. Will the minister outline how the Morrison government has gas-fired recovery through the Beetaloo Basin is supporting the economy, and explain how gas industry is backing workers across regional Australia?
Well done.
The minister has the call.
Well, can I thank the honourable member for Flynn for his question, Mr Speaker? And we know the fighter for Flynn is very keen on the gas industry, Mr Speaker. In fact, the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister have been down at Auckland House in the member's electorate. You can see LNG exports leaving from Gladstone. You can see all of the jobs driven by the resources sector, including gas. But, Mr Speaker, I'm asked about the Beetaloo Basin and supporting the economy. Now, this government has struck out with strategic basin plans into the Beetaloo and other areas, Mr Speaker, but in the Beetaloo we are investing some $224 million to get this strategic basin online. It is our intention to ensure that the basin is delivered earlier than it would have been otherwise. Now, included in the $224 million is $50 million to drive additional exploration, Mr Speaker, some 10 additional wells in that area by 2022. Now, what will this do, Mr Speaker? This will help drive confidence into the basin. Business will do the rest. If the resource is known, if the resource is 2P, if they know that it's there, they will deliver the rest that is needed for this country, Mr Speaker. And what is the outcome? We expect in the Territory that could drive up to 6,000 jobs over the next 20 years. 6,000 jobs. It is about jobs, Mr Speaker. It is about jobs right across the country, including in manufacturing, Mr Speaker. Now, back in Queensland, Mr Speaker, strategic basin plans. We've just announced the North Bowen and Galilee Basin in central Queensland. Nearly $21 million in new funding. Now, I'm told, Mr Speaker, that technically this area is very difficult. It's described as a tough nut. It's a tough nut to crack in the Galilee in terms of getting this gas into the domestic market. Because, Mr Speaker, more gas means better prices, means more manufacturing, means more jobs, and we'll have more to say about further strategic basins as we advance, Mr Speaker. But, Mr Speaker, we know others have a different view. We know others have a different view. And those views are opposed to what we want to do. We want to see more gas. We want to see more gas into electricity. We want to see more things like we've announced in recent weeks, Mr Speaker, into New South Wales. Electricity which is affordable, which is reliable, which relies on gas. We have to ensure that we have a pipeline of projects into the future to make sure that gas is delivered on time at a reliable way with an affordable price, to make sure we are competitive internationally, Mr Speaker, because a competitive gas price helps drive jobs into manufacturing, and we want to see more manufacturing onshore. It is those jobs which will add on. It is those downstream positions. It is those downstream opportunities that will help Australia become once again a powerhouse in manufacturing for industry that drives our exports into the world. So, Mr Speaker, we have a plan to drive more gas into our area. There are those who have a different view. Their view is that there will be no
just
gas.
the minister wasn't actually asked about alternatives.
Making a yes, Mr Speaker. Yep. Yes, Mr Speaker. So, Mr Speaker, we will continue to drive more strategic basins. The Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction is doing a great job on more gas pipelines.
The minister's time
more
has
jobs
concluded. The Manager of Opposition Business has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. These two pay slips are from two train drivers at Pacific National's coal mine in the Bowen Basin, who do the same job. One's employed by Pacific National and one by a labour hire firm. The train driver employed by the labour hire firm is a casual but still earns $308 less every week than his colleague. Why does the Morrison government continue to protect this rort that can only drive wages down?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We believe in a guaranteed safety net for minimum terms and conditions for employees, Mr Speaker. And when it comes to labour hire specifically, as a proportion of all employers, this has remained stable at around 2% for the last decade, and indeed longer than that, Mr Speaker. Labour hire employees have the same rights and protections as all other employers when it comes to, for instance, unfair dismissal rights, award entitlements, general protections and work health and safety protections, Mr Speaker, just to name a few. Labour hire employees working under enterprise agreements also already have rights and entitlements above the award minimum safety net, and this is the framework that those opposite created, Mr Speaker, which is the point. Under Labor's Fair Work Act, the wages and conditions payable to employees are determined by the relevant industrial instrument. There is no requirement under Labor's Fair Work Act for enterprise agreements to provide for a particular level of pay above the safety net, Mr Speaker. The arrangements that we administer are the ones that the Labor Party put in place, Mr Speaker. If that, Mr Speaker, if that is their position, if that is what they maintain as the case, Mr Speaker, if there's some unfairness in the arrangements that are already in place, Mr Speaker, then why did they design it that way?
The member for Moncrieff.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education and Youth. Will the minister update the House on how the Morrison government is supporting young Australians to enter the workforce as we emerge from the pandemic? And is the minister aware of any alternative policies?
The Minister for Education has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for Moncrieff for her question? And she brings to this parliament experience as a workplace trainer and assessor for the National Retail Association before she came here, working with young people to get them into jobs. So real-life experience of getting young people into work. Mr Speaker, young Australians have every reason to be optimistic under our government, and parents have every reason to be optimistic for the future of their sons and daughters as they go into training, education and work. Because under this government, youth unemployment is now down to a 12-year low, Mr Speaker, and it is a full 1 percentage point lower than what it was in March 2020 before the pandemic hit. So it's just great news for young people to see those youth unemployment figures down so low. And Mr Speaker, the biggest drop in the youth unemployment was actually in the member's home state of Queensland, where incredibly in the last 6 months alone—
leave under 94A, he continually interjects.
In the last 6 months alone, the youth unemployment dropped in Queensland from 18% to just 9.8%, an incredible drop over that 6 month period. Now, this has come about, Mr Speaker, because of the solid economic policies which we've put in place, but also the opportunities we've been providing in the education and the training space. And, Mr Speaker, you'd be aware that we provided 30,000 extra university places this year, and we dropped the fees on those courses which have more likelihood of leading into a job, and that's working. So we've got many more people now enrolling into, say, IT courses, engineering courses, physical science courses, because they're the ones that are most likely going to lead into work. Plus, Mr Speaker, in the training and apprenticeship space, we've also provided so many more opportunities, as the Employment and Training Minister knows. $500 million to deliver an extra 163,000 training places, the extension of the Transition to Work program, and of course the extra 310,000 apprenticeships which are being supported by this government. So it's jobs, it is education opportunities, it is training opportunities, all for those young people. Mr Speaker, I'm asked about alternatives. And, Mr Speaker, I'm asked about alternatives, and I've got to say, I mentioned that we're supporting 39,000 additional students at university. Those opposite, in their budget reply, their signature policy, 2,000 in Bill Shorten's old policy. I mentioned 300.
Minister will refer to members by their
the
correct
member for
titles.
Maribyrnong's electorate, Mr Speaker. I mentioned 310,000 apprenticeships we're supporting. Labor's policy, only 10,000. We are delivering for young people.
The minister's time has concluded. The member for Griffith has the call.
Mr Speaker.
Member has the call.
My question is to the Prime Minister. These payslips are from two men who work at the same abattoir, do the same job for the same hours, on the same shift, in the same room. One works for the company which runs the abattoir and another is a labour hire casual. The labour hire worker gets $500 less per week. Why does the Morrison government continue to protect this rort that drives wages down?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Speaker, well, this question is very similar to the
members
one
on both sides
put to me by the member for Watson, Mr. Speaker. And under Labor's Fair Work Act, the wages and conditions paid to employers are determined by the relevant industrial instrument, Mr. Speaker. These are Labor's laws. We actually have sought to improve on those laws, Mr. Speaker. We sought to make positive changes that would help businesses to employ more Australians, would help workers to be able to achieve more and earn more, Mr. Speaker, but those opposite decided not to support them, and they thought that workers were collateral damage for their political objectives in scuttling the changes that we were seeking to make. So, Mr. Speaker, those opposite are no friends of the workers. They're no friends of the workers, Mr. Speaker, and workers know that, Mr. Speaker. Workers know that, Mr. Speaker, because, as the member for Patterson said, Labor sound like they are whinging and people just don't like it. I worry that Labor is sleepwalking off a cliff, Mr. Speaker. That's what workers think of the Labor Party, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Wentworth.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment. Will the minister please update the House on the Morrison government's progress in backing Australian jobs and supporting industry through our negotiations for free trade agreements with the United Kingdom and the European Union?
The Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the member for Wentworth for his question. And he brings to this place a deep knowledge in foreign affairs and trade policy, and he's already making a significant contribution in that area to this parliament, and I thank him for this question. It's a very important question. Since we've come to office, we've finalised 8 free trade agreements. The share of trade covered by FTAs has grown by 26% to 70%. 26% to 70%, and we're working to grow that even further. And why are we working to grow that even further? Because trade creates jobs. Trade creates jobs. 1 in 4 jobs right across this nation are created by trade. 1 in 4 jobs in regional and rural Australia are created by trade. It's 1 in 5 right across this nation. And that is why we are continuing to pursue free trade agreements. So what's on our agenda at the moment? We're pursuing an EU free trade agreement. We've had the 10th round of those negotiations. We made more progress in the 10th round of those negotiations than we've made on the previous negotiations. The 11th round will be held in early June. And more recently I met with Valdis Dombrovskis, the EU trade representative, and we had a very, very good discussion about how we could seek to shape and finalise this agreement after the 12th round of these negotiations, and I look forward to continuing those discussions with him. We're also pursuing a free trade agreement with the United Kingdom. Now, just so we understand, the European Union, 450 million people, a GDP of $14.9 trillion. The UK, 65 million, a GDP of US $2.8 trillion. So both incredibly important FTAs. With the UK FTA, we are now in a sprint to try and finalise that free trade agreement. Both countries want to make sure that we have an ambitious and comprehensive agreement, and that's what we're working towards. I had another conversation, another negotiation with Liz Truss, the UK Trade Minister, last night. We'll meet again on Friday. The Prime Minister has spoken to his counterpart, Boris Johnson, about the Australia-UK Free Trade Agreement. And why? Because it would be a win-win for both nations. It would help and support the agriculture sector here in Australia and in the UK, help and support the services sector here and in the United Kingdom. It would improve and facilitate further investment between both countries, and all that will lead to more and more jobs. That's what this government is about, using our trade policy to create jobs, because we know that benefits all Australians.
The Manager of Opposition Business.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister give a straight answer to this simple question? Should labour hire workers be paid less than the workers beside them who are doing the exact same job?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr. Speaker, the laws that govern workplaces, Mr. Speaker, should be upheld for every single Australian. Every single Australian, Mr. Speaker, and that's what this government provides for.
The member for Leichhardt.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister, the Assistant Minister for Housing, the Assistant Treasurer, Minister for Housing, Minister for Homelessness, Social and Community Housing. Will the Minister inform the House how the Morrison government is backing Australian jobs through our economic recovery by helping Australians achieve their goal in opening their own home? And most importantly, is the Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Assistant Treasurer has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the member for Leichhardt for his question. And the member for Leichhardt has championed so many good causes in this House, but one that he has championed on behalf of North Queenslanders is the first home buyers of his electorate and indeed throughout Australia. And I'd say to the member for Leichhardt, it was wonderful to join him very recently in Cairns with Grant and Heather, a local building company, who explained to me and explained to us that
Leader of the Opposition
explained to us that the home builder program has ignited the residential construction
the Leader of the
industry
Opposition will cease interjecting.
of Northern
the Minister
Australia.
has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll start again, Mr. Speaker. We met with Grant and Heather. We met with Grant and Heather, who explained to us in their building business that when the pandemic hit, sales stopped overnight. We announced the home builder program. It has ignited the residential construction industry in Northern Australia. We've got nearly 4,000 new homes being built now in Northern Australia, in and around the electorate of Leichhardt, that have been fuelled by the home builder program. And one of the most important aspects of the home builder program has been the support it has provided to first home buyers. And it was wonderful to meet even more first home buyers in Northern Australia. Christy in Cairns, who explained to us without home builder, there's no way she could have jumped the deposit hurdle to get into her first home. And Mr. Speaker, the home builder program is built on a range of programs that the Morrison government has put in place, because we are a government for first home buyers. We are a government for home ownership. The first home loan deposit scheme, highly successful, has allowed people to purchase their first home with a deposit of 5%. The new home guarantee, which we put in place in the budget to allow people to build a new home with a 5% deposit. And we've extended that in the budget just a couple of weeks ago with the family home guarantee. Mr. Speaker, the family home guarantee, I think, is a landmark policy for this House. We will now enable single parents with dependent children, 84% of which are women, single parents with children, to purchase a home with a deposit of 2%. And I have been inundated from single parents around the country, including the member for Leichhardt's electorate, who have said, this will be the difference between me renting and me owning, and being able to provide my children with the security that they need in home ownership. So, Mr. Speaker, we are the party of home ownership, whether it's home builder or the first home loan deposit scheme or family home guarantee, and we'll continue to support those Australians.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper. And on a very brief indulgence, Mr. Speaker, can I extend my condolences to Lady Jane Edwards and the entire Edwards family following the passing of Sir Lou Edwards, former Queensland Liberal leader, Treasurer in the Bachelke-Peterson government, Mr. Speaker, Chancellor of the University of Queensland, and also the Chairman of Expo 88 in Brisbane, which some will remember very well. Our deepest condolences to his family, and we thank him for his service.
And the Leader of the Opposition on indulgence.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I join with the Prime Minister in expressing condolences to the family and friends of Sir Lou Edwards, former Deputy Premier, Treasurer, Health Minister in the Queensland Government, someone who, interestingly, began his work career as an electrician and then went and became a doctor. Bob Hawke, of course, appointed him to head Expo 88. He's someone who had friends on both sides of the chamber, including the member for Oxley, who I understand used to catch up with Mr Edwards for lunch. He was born in Ipswich, Mr Edwards, so from that part of the world, the same part of the world that's produced Milton Dick, and our condolences go out to his family and his